Shalom, brothers and sisters, shalom. Giving honor unto the Most High, the Creator and Maker of heaven and earth. This particular presentation, brothers and sisters, as in other ones, is not going to be long. Nonetheless, brothers and sisters, what we want to do in discussing this particular aspect, this particular subject matter in history, if we will, is to get into understanding where do Israelites fit in history and how can we biblically and external sources prove what we say, have been saying, continue to say, and so the evidence of such. This is not going, brothers and sisters, to be a said long presentation. Nonetheless, we want to, brothers and sisters, expound upon this particular matter. So, without any further ado, let us start in this particular case. The matter of the Israelites in Egypt. According to Malek in his book, Atlas of Ancient Egypt, we see that there were Asiatics in the land of Egypt in the Delta, this being the northern part of Egypt, this being in the era of dynasties 11 through 12. Now, what is referred to as the Middle Kingdom of Egypt? Why does that, brothers and sisters, become important in what we're talking about? Is because that is when the said Asiatics, or the Amu, as the Egyptians referred to them as, were in Egypt very, very heavily. When we go into the aspect of the Brooklyn Papyrus, the Ipuwer Papyrus, and so forth and so on, it dates to the era and to the timing of Egypt's Middle Kingdom. So that is why it becomes of importance. And when it is referred to as the Brooklyn Papyrus, is when you read about the Hebrew names such as Asher and the Hebrew names such as Issachar inside of Egyptian records. So these are things that we just want to emphasize and point out for reason and purposes. The fact remains that, quote, mud brick pyramids were built in Egypt for Senusret and Amenemhat. Now, brothers and sisters, what we are looking at here is a picture of said the mud brick pyramid. This is one of them. Now, the people whom we mentioned by the name of Senusret was called Sesostris by the Greeks, and who we call Amenemhat was called Amenophis by the Greeks. And they were both brothers and sisters in the era of Dynasty 12 of Egypt. So this is something that we want to emphasize and point out for reasonable purposes. Thank you. The mud brick was brought there by the Asiatics who knew about that particular building. The Bible says they built Pithom and Ramses. Now, in the time of this is called Ramses, was also called later Avaris. When we are reading in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, and it speaks about Pithom and Ramses, that is actual what you call an anachronism. That is to say that whoever was writing in that particular time is going to give you the name of the city in that particular author's time that the Israelites built. So that's something we want to emphasize for edification purposes. Later on, that same city was called Avaris, and in archaeology, that place is referred to as Tel El Dab'a. All right, I want to write that in for a reasonable purpose. Tel El Dab'a. That's the area when you look that up in archaeology, what we are talking about, where the Israelites were and where they did their construction work under enslavement, if you will. All right. So let us continue. The time we are speaking of is when the Amu were in Egypt. The Amu were Asiatics. The Middle Kingdom of Egypt, according to David in the book, The Egyptian Kingdoms, we see there were a number of Asiatic and Nubian people used as servants. Now, brothers and sisters, when we say Asiatic, we are speaking about the aspect of the Western Asiatic. We're not talking, no disrespect intended, about the Eastern Asiatic, such as Korea or China. All right. So we just want to point that part out for reasonable purposes, if we will. Okay. Let us continue. It goes on to say in the writing here, according to the Simna 8 wall, the Ethiopians were captured by the Egyptians. Now, this right here, brothers and sisters, is a picture of the Egyptians in writing, speaking about the capture of the Ethiopians or the Nubians, if we will. Now, this is dated to, brothers and sisters, the 12th dynasty of Egypt. All right. And so, what this is called in part, um, Semna 8. All right. So, we just want to point that out, brothers and sisters, for reasonable purposes. Okay. So, you can look that up in your own particular time. We just want to show a couple of pictures of what we're talking about. All right. And it goes on to say here, brothers and sisters, now accepting this as history and correlating it to what we read in Josephus, the Ethiopian people were captured. And this is how Moses, before his calling by the Creator, acquired an Ethiopian wife. Moses, according to Exodus, was great in the land of Egypt. All right. Now, when we go to the book Egypt, Canaan, and Israel in Ancient Times by Radford, we see that there were numerous Asiatics who were servants to the Egyptians. Now, what we want to point out, brothers and sisters, is this. When you go to the book called Egypt, pardon that, Egypt, Canaan, and Israel in ancient times, right? And when you go, brothers and sisters, into the book called the Egyptian Kingdoms, which is both available for those who want it online, right? It gets brothers and sisters into the aspect, if we will, about the Israelites being in Egypt. But we have to understand that the captor is not going to call you by the name that you have for yourself. All right. They're going to give you a byword. You understand? And so when we read about the terminologies such as Amu or Amu, spelled either way, we're talking about these Asiatics that were inside of the land of Egypt. All right. So let's understand that for edification purposes. Now, when we read in Josephus, as pointed out in this, it says that Moses had a wife from Ethiopia, which would mean by those who are studying, Moses would have had two wives. That would have been Thurbis, all right, as said in the book of Josephus. And that would have also, brothers and sisters, had been Zipporah, who was the Midianite. Sometimes people say Moses only had one wife, and that in Numbers chapter 12 in the Bible, that Zipporah is the Cushite or Ethiopian wife of Moses because of the geographical government aspect of showing where the Cushites had ruled over where the people of Midian were. Even if that were to be the case, when you study, as pointed out in the book of Josephus, it still shows it to be two different women. So even if the Ethiopians were ruling where the Midianites were in Saudi Arabia, brothers and sisters, the people who Moses married into when he was a ruler in Egypt, remembering that the Bible in the book of Exodus chapter 11, it says that the man Moses was great in the land of Egypt. So it's not too hard to figure out what we are getting into and what we're talking about for reasonable purposes. All right, let us continue, brothers and sisters, in this particular matter. The Bible in Exodus tells us that a mixed multitude left with the Israelites. There were Ethiopian people among the Israelites in the Exodus. The Exodus is not contested, but many people do contest who the Pharaoh was. According to the Brooklyn Papyrus 35.1446, I want to point this out there, all right, and write this in here. Brooklyn Papyrus 35.1446, right? We see that Seneptisi, during the rule of Sobekotep III, we see that his successor was Neferhotep, and the next two successors were his brothers, not his sons. So what are we pointing out? Is that Sobekotep III was the pharaoh that the woman Seneptisi wrote what is understood and said to be the Brooklyn Papyrus. And in the Brooklyn Papyrus, over 30% of the people listed in there are of Hebrew names. You can look that up in that particular case. What we're looking at here, we want to point out, brothers and sisters, is a picture of Senate, pardon me, is a picture of Sobek Hotep. Now we want to point out something about this. And as you can see on the crown, in this particular pharaoh case, you have the image of the serpent. The serpent, brothers and sisters, in ancient Egypt was called Apep. And in that particular aspect and in that particular culture, you had it to where, brothers and sisters, it represented what we, the Israelites, would say as the Nakash, if we will. But it didn't always represent negativity inside of Egyptian culture. Why do we want to point that out, brothers and sisters, with the image of this pharaoh here being in Dynasty 13 and the symbol of the serpent on his crown? Brothers and sisters, is because that was the situation when Aaron was told to cast his rod down. It crept in long and became a serpent. And the Egyptians did it with their secret arts, like that's what we do, kind of thing. You understand? So looking at it, brothers and sisters, in that particular realm, that was not far-fetched for the Egyptians to turn sticks or staffs into serpents. The situation that happened with the Pharaoh and Moses is the fact of when the serpent staff of Moses and Aaron, brothers and sisters, swallowed up the serpent's staffs that the other people, the Egyptians, had. You understand? So that's something we want to point out for reasonable purposes, if we will. All right. According to the Epura Papyrus, we read, many dead are buried in a river. Indeed, every dead person is a well-born man. We know the Bible speaks to the death of the firstborn of Egypt. The Epura Papyrus dates to the era of Dynasty 13, and the word hem and hemet that we see in there means slave. So in Egyptian, hem and hemet, and what is referred to as the Epura, the word being hem and hemet. All right. So that's something we want to emphasize and point out for reasonable purposes. All right. It goes on to saying this. One direct quote from the Apera Papyrus is, indeed, everywhere barley has perished, and men are stripped from clothes, spices, and oils, and everyone says there is none. The storehouse is empty, and its keeper is stretched on the ground. A happy state of affairs. Obviously, this common happy state of affairs is sarcastic. In Exodus chapter 9, verse 31, we see, and the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in the air and the flax was boiled. According to the book Egypt Talk and Writing, which is a book I released, Think the Most High, back in 2016, it says this: the wind blowing, the sea dividing into parts, they pass over. The Hebrews flee through the open channel in haste. They go jumping, journeying through such. The tribes descend into the deep, the people into the waters. The above is from the Serabit El Kadim called Dafka. Now, what that was talking about is a Satanic writing that speaks of the Exodus external to the Bible. And those who know and understand know that when the Israelites was in the wilderness, they wrote that on the stones and rocks that was inside of the Sinai. That shows a couple of things that is found in the land of the East. So therefore, no disrespect intended, the theory, the concept, the ideology of saying that America in the West is the land that the Bible's talking about, where the people were enslaved, that Egypt is truly in Mexico and Jerusalem is in Utah. Such is not the case. All right. So we just want to go over that for edification purposes. All right. So to give a synopsis of what we talked about in that particular realm, this right here is a picture of a copy of the Imperial Papyrus. All right. Now, it's written not in a regular quote unquote hieroglyphic writing of ancient Egypt, but more so the hieratic writing. All right. Because there were three different forms of writing in Egypt. You had the hieratic, demotic, and the regular metroneta, or what they call the regular hieroglyphic writing. All right. So this is what we want to emphasize and show for reasonable purposes. All right. Inside of the Imperial Papyrus, it talks about emphatically by saying something that is intriguing. And it says that scribes are killed and their writings are taken away. It says that inside the Imperial Papyrus. So we have to ask, if there's a common gentleman, for the lack of a better word, inside of ancient Egypt, and he is writing, and he says that the scribes are killed and their writings are taken away. What, brothers and sisters, were the Egyptians doing, hiding the writings and killing the scribes? So this is something, brothers and sisters, we want to point out for edification purposes, if we will. All right. All righty. Pardon that. We want to, brothers and sisters, continue on in this particular matter, if we will. The dispersion. Let us understand that Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, starts with the word and. This means we have to see that Israel was scattered in verse 64. Then we see, brothers and sisters, that the ships were used. We're going to, brothers and sisters, read what we was just talking about in Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. All right, and discuss it a little bit, if we will. All right. And it says this. And the Lord shall bring you back into Egypt with ships, by the way which I said to you, you shall never see it again. And there you shall be offered for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, and no one will buy you. So one of the things to point out, brothers and sisters, is this in Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. In many Bibles, it says that you will be sold unto your enemies. In the Hebrew, it distinctly says you will offer or sell yourselves unto your enemies. There, there meaning in Mizraim. We've been pointing out for some time, brothers and sisters, that Mizraim is not the accurate word for Egypt. We've been talking about this for some time now. The word Mizraim, brothers and sisters, it comes from the Hebrew root word matzor. The word matzor, brothers and sisters, means distress or besiege. All right. So that's something we want to point out for reasonable purposes. To the brother Black Av, Shabbat Shalom Ak, same to you. Thank you for the comment. All right. So, brothers and sisters, they were Israelites, they were Canaanites, they were different nations of people that went from Egypt to Israel back and forth, or from Egypt to Canaan back and forth, or from Egypt in the Delta back and forth between there and Babylon. So it was a walking thing in many, many cases. As pointed out inside the book, Egypt Talk and Writing, the later emperor of Rome by the name of Titus, he crossed over the desert from where the Israelites were to get to where Egypt was. So that's something we want to point out for reasonable purposes. All right. Let us continue. Oh, pardon me. I wanted to show, if we will, this here is the Macmillan Bible Atlas. All right. And we want to show, brothers and sisters, this would be on page, in this particular book, on page 38. All right. This here is where Egypt is. This is where the Levant is, where Canaan is. The people would have just been able to migrate back and forth between there and there. In the Bible, when the Exodus occurred, it says that the Most High did not lead the Israelites by the way of the Philistines. So it shows you geographically in the Bible where we're talking about. The Philistines, sorry. They, according to the book of Amos and according to history, they came from Kaftor. Kaftor is an island understood today as Crete, where the Philistines came from. The Philistines from Kaftor, as it says in the book of Amos. So all of these things we want to point out as going over this, right? We want to point out as going over in this, brothers and sisters, that geographically, what we call the Western Hemisphere is not where the Israelites were promised to go to as far as the promised land. All right. So if we look at this right here, this being the Sinai Peninsula, all right, this right here being Egypt, Canaan, where the people would have been able to travel back and forth. All right. So that's something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right. Let us continue, brothers and sisters, in this particular matter. The Israelites were not shipped from the land of Israel to literal Egypt in Northeast Africa. Josephus, in his book, Wars of the Jews, stated that the tallest and most beautiful of the Hebrews, Titus reserved for the triumph. The triumph was done in Rome. Titus is also recorded as having Israelites eaten by animals in arenas, similar like the Europeans did black babies with alligator baits, if you will. And that Israelites were by Titus made to kill each other. So there are a couple of things regarding the guy Titus of Rome and the Israelites that we want to talk about for edification purposes. He was noted for having Israelites fight one another inside of arenas. Did you see or know of the movie Django? Because in that movie, the black men in that movie were made to fight to the death of one another, similar to the way the book of Josephus and Wars of the Jews, book 5, Wars of the Jews of book 7, talks about what Titus was having to be done with the Israelites. So that's something we want to point out for reasonable purposes. Did you know or understand of black babies being used as alligator bait, if we will, during the enslavement of our people? The aspect too of the Europeans was also done with our people being used, as said, like alligator bait that was done with our people. So these are things that were done by the Romans and then were later done by, you may want to say, their descendants to us as a people. All right. So, brothers and sisters, let us continue, if we will, in this particular matter. Thank you for the time, brothers and sisters, to the people who are joined on. All right. In Josephus, we see that in Wars of the Jews, that the people were sent from Egypt to Rome by ship. The Israelites that were not sent from Israel to Egypt by ship. So, what do we want to point out, getting back, if we will, into this atlas, the Macmillan Bible Atlas, as you can see here, thank you for that. All right, is this right here. And on page 38, all right, as of many other pictures in this book, it shows you, brothers and sisters, about the people in a migration. All right. So in this particular realm, here's Egypt. Here's where Canaan was. All right. Shalom, Sav King. Thank you for the shout out, my brother. All right. So this is something we just want to go over and show. This is where the people migrated to back and forth. Abraham went from the land of Canaan to Egypt. Jacob went from the land of Canaan to Egypt. Jeremiah, the prophet, was taken from that land of Canaan, which later on became known as the land of Israel, to Egypt, brothers and sisters. You have it to where Ramses II and before him Thutmose III of Egypt went into the area of the Levant where Canaan / the land of Israel was at. You had Necho Rehembre, who was, in this particular case, sadly, the assassinator of King Josiah of Judah. You had it to where he went from Egypt going over to the war of Carchemish, brothers and sisters, and he was going from Egypt through the Levant area. So you had it to where there was Shemite people and Hamite people that traversed back and forth between that particular area. So, brothers and sisters, we want to sit there and point that out for edification purposes, if you will. So, brothers and sisters, let us go. The scattering of the Israelites from the land of Israel to other parts can be seen in the fact that Will Durant, in his book called Caesar and Christ, that the Carthaginians were akin to Jews in the Bible, and their language had a Hebrew tone. Now, the people whom we were just talking about in this particular case was known in history as the Phoenicians. Sorry. Now, recently I was in a discussion with some people about the Phoenician people, and one of the people were trying to say that they genetically come from Scandinavia. One case. Another case person said Sardinia. No, brothers and sisters. The people known as the Phoenicians came from a place, brothers and sisters, known as this here, Tyre. Tyre is mentioned in the Bible in the book of in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 27. So the people of the Tyrians, the people of Tyre, brothers and sisters, they being Canaanites, they also, in part being of the tribe of Zebulun, migrated from where that land was, going across the Mediterranean to the place later known as Carthage. When you read about the Periplus of Hanno, I want to point this out. The Periplus of Hanno, brothers and sisters, it gets into the aspect of the people later on that were known as the Phoenicians went to the Gambia, which is in Western Africa. So it's not too hard to figure out what we are talking about for edification purposes, if we will. Now, this is a sidebar thing, but there's a movement, if you want to call it that, of saying that the quote, not out of Africa, but out of Europe is where civilization supposedly had begun. First off, to my knowledge, no Hebrew word can be equated to the word civilization. To my knowledge, no indigenous African word can be equated to the word civilization. The word civilization comes from the Latin word civilis, which means city. So it's just like if you take somebody from, to put it in layman terms, from the hood, and that person winds up moving into the palace, they're going to say things such as, this is fat, the crib is nice. So that will become known as the nice crib. And that terminology will be passed on from year to year, generation to generation. Well, that is what happened with the terminology civilis from the Latin, which became into the English word known as civilization, which simply means city. Because when you know where the Europeans come from, in this particular case, that right there was something that was amazing to them. Brothers and sisters, when you go into what is referred to as secular history, you had it to where the Greek historian named Herodotus in the 5th century or so BCE went to Egypt and was amazed. He went over by where Babylon was and was amazed, brothers and sisters. So during the era of Herodotus is when the Persian people were ruling in the world in this particular case and in this particular time. So there was, correct me if I'm wrong, no said African historian that went over to Europe and was amazed, like Herodotus was when he went into Egypt, if we will. Correct me if I'm wrong. There was no, brothers and sisters, no Asiatic. And we explained earlier what we mean by Asiatic. There was, correct me if I'm wrong, no Asiatic leader that or explorer or so that went to Europe and was just amazed. The Israelites in the Bible that speak about going over to Greece, it says that they were sent there as slaves. The book of Maccabees, first Maccabees chapter 3 into chapter 5, talks about how the Greeks used to sit there and go and buy slaves of the children of Israel. So the Greeks and Greek civilization, and then later Roman civilization, brothers and sisters, is not something that was even adorned even by the Israelites or many other peoples. So, brothers and sisters, this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right. So let us continue in this particular matter. All right. The Israelites, according to historians, migrated, as a map shows, from Assyria to parts in Africa. And it should be noted that when the kingdom of Hoshea fell, that not all the Israelites were taken to Assyria. So what are we talking about, brothers and sisters? In that particular matter is this. All right. From Assyria to Africa, from Jerusalem to Africa. Now, I want to show with a pen what we're talking about. All right. Here, Saudi Arabia. Assyria is over here, not Syria, but Assyria. And the people that became known as the Khan Borno in time, brothers and sisters, were the Israelites that fled from Assyria when it fell to Babylon. Then you had it to where coming out of from where Jerusalem was, namely that's to say where the southern kingdom was, for the lack of a better term. This is where they was fleeing into Africa and into African places. Now, this is part of the dispersion that Deuteronomy 4 talks about. This is part of the dispersion, brothers and sisters, that Deuteronomy 28 talks about. So we want to show this picture and what we're talking about for edification purposes. All right. In a video recently done on this channel, I spoke about the aspect of the dispersion of Israel, and it would make sense that if somebody's coming against you from the north, that you would run south. So, brothers and sisters, when President Gabal Nasser of Egypt back in the 1950s said that you won't have peace because you left black and you came back white, the Arabian world, that even the Palestinian world too knows who the true people of Israel are. Israelites that are in the land of Israel today will tell you that the problem is not the Arabians or the Palestinians. They will tell you that. The problem, brothers and sisters, is Jewish people. They've told people that. There's a video that's out called In Search of Bin Laden or In Search of Osama bin Laden. And in that video, which was even done by a white dude, you will find the people that was attacking him and literally pushing him literally wasn't the Arabs, it was the Jewish people. Now, of course, we know in history the Arabians were not friends of the Israelites. You understand? Because we have to know and understand that between the true nation of Edom and the true nations of the Arabs, Yishmael, with the people of the Nabateans. I want to write this in for edification purposes. Nabateans, right, come from Nabai oat. The Nabaot people became known as the Nabateans, and this is the firstborn of Yishmael. All right, so the Nabateans and the Edomites were friends along with the Romans in getting the true house of Israel out of the land of Israel. So we want to, brothers and sisters, if we will, we're going to read in the scriptures in Psalms chapter 83, all right, for edification purposes. All right, thank you for the time. And it says this, if we will, keep not still, O Elohim. Do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O Elohim. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and they who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty converse against your people, and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Yisrael, Israel, may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They have formed a confederacy against you, the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon and Amalek, Philistia and the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria also has joined with them. They have been a help to the children of Lot. Brothers and sisters, so when we're talking about Psalm 83 and it lists the different nations about who was in cahoots with who, it mentions Edom and it mentions Tyre. Brothers and sisters, when you go into the book of Joel, it talks about the people of Tyre or Zidon. Now, Tyre was the capital. The people there were known as Zidon or the Zidonians. It talks about how they, in the book of Joel, the third chapter, sold the people of Judah to the Grecians. So the civilization that Greece wants to sit there and promote, all right, as in this book here, like Greek civilization, Greece in the Hellenistic world, and so forth and so on. And what they want to sit there and talk about and have promoted is showing good and well that it was about capturing people and having them do the work for them in this particular matter and in this particular aspect. You understand? They were all in cahoots, even if they didn't get along one with another. One thing we know and understand is that they were in agreement against the Israelites. So that's something we want to point out in that particular case. All right. The Maccabees were John Maccabees, Simon Maccabees, Judah Maccabees, Eleazar Maccabees, and Jonathan Maccabees. Those were the five sons of Mattiah HaMaccabi. John will be said as Yochanan, which brothers and sisters, Yochanan, we want to get some kind of Hebrew in this. All right, Yochanan would be God is gracious. And we had Simon, right, which would be Shimon, meaning hearing. Then we have Judah, Maccabi, and we know Yahudah means praise be God. Then we have Eleazar, Maccabi, and that means Eleazar means my God is a help. Then we have Jonathan Maccabee, meaning Jonathan Maccabee, meaning the whole Natan, meaning God has given. So that's something that we want to go over for edification purposes. All right. So let us continue on in this. These were the stars that were cast down to the ground that Daniel chapter 8, verse 10 talks about. We're going to go and let the book speak in this case. Let us go to Daniel, all right, chapter 8, and we're going to read from verse 9 to verse 12. All right, so this is something we want to emphasize for reasonable purposes, if you will. All right. We are in the book of the prophet Daniel, chapter 8, verse 9. And let's see what it says concerning this kind of matter, brothers and sisters. All right. It says the following. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south and toward the east and toward the glorious land. And it grew up to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and trampled upon them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifice. And he cast truth to the ground, and he did all this and prospered. There's a couple of things we want to point out. In verse 9, it says, out of one of them came forth a little horn. This little horn was known as Antiochus Epiphanes, also known as Antiochus the Fourth. All right. He was the son of Antiochus the Third. All right. And so now it goes on to say, and grew exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. So south meaning south of where he came from, which would be toward Africa, brothers and sisters, because they came from Greece, right? And south also where Israel was, because Israel is in northeast Africa for those who are interested, and brothers and sisters toward the east, meaning east of where Antiochus Epiphanes came from, and toward the glorious land. The glorious land is obviously in Daniel's mind his land, the land of Israel. Then it goes on to say, and it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground and trampled upon them. So now, brothers and sisters, when you get to the aspect of what happened with the after the death of Alexander, you had Ptolemy, you had Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Cassander. So the main ones of that would be of importance to the Israelites, brothers and sisters, will be brothers and sisters, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. Now, this is not promoting book sales on the Sabbath. We want to read something out of this book here, a brother wrote, toward out to the Most High, all right, about the Ptolemies and the Seleucids for edification purposes. And it goes to say this. The Seleucids, which were important to the Israelites. Seleucus the first, who ruled Syria. Antiochus the fourth, who defeated Ptolemy the fifth. Seleucus the fourth, he was vital in an attack that came from Rome. And Antiochus the fourth, who was defeated by the Israelites in the Best Zur battle. The aspect later on, not far in history, of what happened with the Israelites, brothers and sisters, is that after Alexander, you had the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. The main one of the Ptolemies and the Seleucids that was important to the Israelites were the Seleucids, and that's where Antiochus Epiphanes comes from. And it goes on to say, right, and he even exalted himself as high as the Prince of Hosts. Now, in Daniel chapter 8, verse 11, it uses the Hebrew word sarim, which means the captain or the ruler of the princes, or the ruler of rulers. This is talking about the Most High. All right. Antiochus Epiphanes did this. And it says, by him, the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So when you go into the aspect of what happened with Antiochus Epiphanes, going into the temple, trying to sit there and have Zeus erected up in there, and so forth and so on, that led to the revolt of the Maccabees going up against the Greeks. And in the battle of Beth Zur, the Israelites won. So, brothers and sisters, when we understand how world history, shit, form, and fashion within the aspect of the Israelite history, and how Israelite history can be shown throughout the world, that's what these videos are about, brothers and sisters. All right, giving honor and praise to the creator of heaven and earth. Okay, and it goes on to say this. In 198 BCE, Antiochus III made war against Judah. After him, his son Antiochus IV made war against Judah. In 168 BCE, the Greeks put Zeus in the temple, and the Israelites went to war about this. The battle, as pointed out, of Bet Zur in 165 BCE is when Hanukkah comes into play. So these are some of the dates, all right, we want to point out. 168 BCE, 165 BCE. All right. So in 165 BCE is when you had it to when the people, brothers and sisters, defeated the Greeks, the army of the Ptolemy people. Pardon me, the people of the Seleucids. Sorry about that. All right. Judah Maccabee passed away in 160 BCE. And then in time also is when Rome defeated Greece in a battle against Perseus, the son of Philip V, in 168 BCE. So, brothers and sisters, as the Maccabees was going to war against the Greeks were also being defeated by the Romans. So, this is how we want to know and show how the history intertwines one with another in this particular realm. All right. And it goes on to say this. The brother Simon Maccabee took the role in 142 BCE, and he made the Idumean people, who were the Edomites, practice the ways of the Israelites. Why does that become important? Simon Maccabees had it to where, brothers and sisters, the Edomite people were being made to keep the ways of the Israelites. Can I get a one if I can be heard? Because we want to get into something right now. All right. Can I be heard? Press, please. One. Brothers and sisters. Sorry about that. All right. Can I be heard? Press a one. And for the people, this is aspartame free. Brothers and sisters, this is a friend of mine who put me on to this. Aspartame free that I drink. All right. Sugar free soda that's aspartame free. All right, but that's neither here nor there. We want to get back. Thank you to the brothers and sisters, and look like it sees sisters, Global Purpose and the Kenya Ben Israel. Well, that's got to be a male saying Ben. But brothers and sisters, to the people who press one, I appreciate that. So we want to talk about the Idumean people being taught about the ways of the Israelites from Simon Maccabees. What can we learn from that, brothers and sisters? That is how the scriptures got into where the Europeans were. After the situation with Simon Maccabees teaching the Edomites about circumcision, about the Torah, about the commandments, the laws, and even giving them the knowledge of the history of Israel, is how later on, when Israel, under the era of Hadrian, we want to talk about that briefly. Hadrian, right? Remember, Edom is mentioned, brothers and sisters, in Psalms chapter 83, about the aspect, brothers and sisters, of being the nations that want to cut the name of Israel off from remembrance. Edom, according to Ezekiel chapter 35 and Ezekiel chapter 36, had a hatred of old for the house of Israel. By the time Hadrian comes along the scene in the 2nd century CE, or 2nd century AD, if we will, right? And had it forbidden for the Israelites to go into the land of Israel. This being 20 or so years after the Kittos battle. The Kittos battle was between the Israelites that was in Cyrene or in Libya against the Romans. When they wanted to get back into their land, they were pushed even further into northern Africa. Already, brothers and sisters, going there already on their own. They did always want to go back into their land. All right. So, looking at that, if we will, brothers and sisters, the Caesars of Rome and the Edomites had a pact and a unit and was together. They were friends, they were buddies, if we will, for edification purposes, so we can know what that history entails in that particular realm. Brothers and sisters, I want to, if we will, show what we're talking about in this particular matter. All right? Thank you for the time and the patience in this particular realm. All right? This is not plain salesman from the Talk Egypt book and writing. Look at this. You had, we want to show with the pen. All right. You had Edom, Edom, and Edom. Herod, Augustus. Herod was an Edomite. Augustus was a Roman. They were friends. Edom, before that, Herod, Julius Caesar were friends. Edom, Antipater. Jul- and Antipater was the father of Herod. And Julius Caesar were friends. They were all buddies. The Romans and the Edomites were buddies, which will now make sense as to why, in what is referred to as the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Romans were called Edomites. Not that linearly or through genetic, that they were the same people, but politically, socially, and through aspects of friendship, they were the same people, but not by seed line and heritage per se. So, brothers and sisters, if the era of Antipater and Herod, who were Edomites, or people of the Idumeans, you had it to where, brothers and sisters, Simon Maccabees, brothers and sisters, he passed away before all of that between Herod and them being friends. But that's why Simon Maccabees becomes of importance, because he, as well later on as his son, John Hyrcanus, who was an Israelite, made the Edomites get into the culture of the Israelites. In the book of Josephus, it goes into book 13, chapter 9, when it goes into that particular point. One, so those who want to care to read it on their own, what we're talking about is in Josephus' book, Antiquities of the Jews, book 13, chapter 9, is where that reference can be shown about Simon and later on John Hyrcanus teaching the Edomites about the ways of the Israelites. That was before the situation with Herod, who was also of Edom. So that's how they was able to have the Israelite records, and that's shown. Antipater, who was the father of Herod, were friends with Julius Caesar. We know Julius Caesar and Pompey, though they had rivalry, they were still friends politically against the house of Israel. All right. So that's something we want to talk about in that particular case. Somebody asked the question: is there any mention of the so-called Messiah of the New Testament in the Apocrypha? Yeah, by interjection, when you go into the book of Ezra. Yeah, when it talks about in the book of Ezra saying, and his son Jesus and so forth, that just like the New Testament was added to the Old Testament, that part in the Apocrypha was inserted in as well. So hopefully that answered the question in that particular realm. All right. In Maccabees, from all I've read in Maccabees, nah. Somebody asked, was it inside of Maccabees? I've never read of who they refer to as Yeshua ben Yosef or Yeshua, son of David or so. Now, I've never read of that inside of Maccabees from the studies I've done. If one runs across that, please let me know. But I do know that just as much as the New Testament, which was not the subject here, but I thank you for the comment or the question. Just as much as the New Testament, from Matthew to Revelation, was put alongside what the Christians call the law and the prophets, making us the Bible, so, brothers and sisters, was there an assertion made inside of the book of Ezra, speaking of who the New Testament talks about. So that's something we want to emphasize. Now, I understand and respect that there are brothers and sisters who are deemed or said as messianic, who follow the channel and who listen. Those who know good and well, not to be haughty, a brother is Old Testament based. And so looking at it in that particular realm and so forth and so on, let us take a brief moment. Hopefully the man of Edom and why they became important in discussing this was understood. Let's take a brief moment concerning the aspect of why we're Old Testament based in discussing this history, because there's been people who have said that, well, Old Testament Israelites seem to think that the history stopped with Persia and then picked up in colonial America. No, we do not teach and say those kind of things. All right. That's something for reasonable purposes. What we do know and teach upon is that if you're saying in Matthew chapter 5 that Yeshua did not come to destroy the law or the prophets, if you're saying in First John chapter 5 that the commandments of God are not grievous, if you're saying in Revelation 22 that they who do not keep the laws and the commandments are to be equated as dogs, why not just be Torah based? You got portions in the New Testament that's telling you to go back to the law. So why then just stay not in the law? Just a question. All right. Somebody stated, I'm thinking the Maccabees would have spoken of it if it was real. All right. And then the brother or sister wrote, I'm no messianic brother. LOL. All right. So, brothers and sisters, that's just something we want to um speak upon in reference purposes or so. Brothers and sisters, if we're looking at this, and the New Testament is telling you to go back to the Old Testament, if the Old Testament is telling you to go back to the laws, Malachi chapter 4, remember the law of Moses, my servant. If the Old Testament and David telling Solomon to remember the laws of Moses, if Joshua is telling you about keeping the laws of Moses, how then can we not be Torah based? The New Testament that's given to us as non-messianics, quote unquote, is telling people to go back to the Old Testament. So if you believe that, then why not go to the Old Testament? That's just the question. All right, so let us continue in this particular realm, brothers and sisters. The Maccabees had independence from 142 BCE to 63 BCE. When this time comes, Pompey of Rome, who was later killed by Ptolemy the 13th of the people in Egypt, made Judah a Roman province. After the time of Pompey, his former son-in-law, Julius Caesar, took control of where Israel was and was buddies or friends with the Idumeans. Julius Caesar is later killed by Brutus and others in 44 BCE. In time, his nephew Octavian, after defeating Mark Antony with the help of Agrippa, who was of Edom, in 31 BCE, in the Battle of Actium, became Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Brothers and sisters, the history of the Israelites, as it gets into what happened with the Romans, is something that's very, very important for reasonable and for edification purposes. We, in times past, all right, spoke upon this matter as so. All right, and I want to show this for reasonable purposes, as we've done in the past on this channel. This right here shows from Rome, where Rome was, to where Jerusalem was. From where Rome was to where Jerusalem was. See, they descending going south. So from where Jerusalem was to where they migrated to where West Africa was. Why will that not make sense? If they're coming down this way, you're going to go this way. When you're going, when the enemy stronger than you is coming against you. So that's something we want to talk about. The Romans came against the Israelites politically, economically, socially, and in other aspects. So as the Israelites were in part called the Amu in Egypt, the Israelites were called the Perigini by the Romans. I want to write that word in. That was one of the terminologies that the people of Rome referred to the Israelites as. All right. So let us go on, if we will, in this particular matter. The successor of Octavian was Tiberius, who was succeeded by Caligula. According to Tacitus, the Levites preferred to fight as opposed to have Caligula's image inside of their temple. Tacitus, Book of the Histories, Book 5. Brothers and sisters, we want to show whom we was talking about. This is a picture, of Tacitus in this particular case. Tacitus, the Roman historian that you hear me talk about periodically like that, right? Right here, as we see, is his picture. Why does that become important? Because Tacitus states that in his day and time, the Romans thought that the Iuda or Judah or the people of Judea came from Ethiopia. If a man looking like this says, for the lack of a better term in English, that the Jews come out of Ethiopia, they did not look like this guy right here. No one is going to say that this guy looked like an Ethiopian, just hands down. Knowing that Etienne and ops is the Greek terminology for burnt face, this guy doesn't have a burnt face. If the Israelites were thought of by the Romans to come from the place of burnt faces, they would not have been looking like this guy right here. So just want to point that out for reasonable purposes, if we will. All right. Claudius is celebrated for conquering Britain, but detested for sending Florus, a Syrian leader, against the Israelites. The next leader of Rome was Nero, who murdered his own mother, all right, which is matricide, then committed suicide after sending Vespasian against the Israelites. He conquered Jotapata, Samaria, and Jericho. But when Nero was sent to Rome, but when Nero died, he went to Rome by ship and had Titus sent against the Israelites. So what's going on right here? You had the Emperor Nero, brothers and sisters, going against, if we will, the Israelites. Nero committed suicide, but prior to his suicide, brothers and sisters, he sent Vespasian against the Israelites. When Nero did commit suicide, Vespasian went against a guy named Otho or so to go up against the aspect of becoming the next emperor. So that's what that was in that. And then Vespasian left his son Titus to sit there and deal with the matter of conquering Jerusalem. All right. So that's something we want to point out for reference purposes, if we will. All right. Goes on to say, in 70 AD, we know that the temple was destroyed. According to Michael Grant in his book, it says the history of ancient Israel, we see that all the seed of David was hunted and killed. Why do you think the Jewish people in the land of Israel does not go against Islam, and when they get the quote Dome of the Rock or whatever that is gotten rid of, supports the Catholic Church that's in there, is because they know they're not the true people of Israel. The Jewish people we know are very, not to be racist, they're very vindictive. The fact that they are too comfortable in being in that land shows you that they were not the people in that land in ancient times. That was plundered by the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, the Caesars. They were not the people that was fighting in the Kittos battle, brothers and sisters. The Kittos battle were the people that were in Cyrene. Now we want to show a map where, if we will, where Cyrene, Libya, 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 Cyrene, over here. That's in northern Africa. The Kittos battle was between the people that was in North Africa and the Romans, when the Israelites who were there wanted to go back into the land of Israel. The Israelites, just like the president of Egypt said, Gabal Nasir, you left black and you came back white. There will not be peace. So, brothers and sisters, one of the faults that the Kemetic community has done is trying to go against the Israelites to support Egypt. You ain't got to try to knock Israel to support Egypt. Just talk about Ramses. Just talk about the people of Thutmose. Just talk about the Amenemhat people. But your concern was not about true Egypt. Your concern was a New Age movement, a Masonic slash Jesuit slash Illuminati organization to go against the Bible and to go against the house of Israel. That's why you could care less about Pepi of Dynasty 6 being a sodomite. That doesn't appeal or make you want to say, hold on, we got to sit there and study this to see what this culture is about. You understand? You tried to use Egypt to go against Israel, and that was not the best idea to do in that particular case. You understand? Just as much as the Kemetic community does not have a concept to go against the Arabians that was there since 640 or 641 AC, AD, sorry, or CE, the Common Era, right? Where is your Egyptian writing that says you're going to get your land back from the Arabian people? Because we have biblical prophecy that speaks about Israel getting their land back from Edom and the nations that have used the land of Israel for their own devices, if you will. To the people who come against saying that we are not, quote, from Africa, the or Chachamists or indigenous, as they refer to themselves as, of North America. Question is, the black man in the West didn't make treaties with you and broke them. We claim the land in the East. So if you claim what is now known as the United States, my indigenous brother and sister, the Hebrew Israelites, as you call us, which we just call ourselves Israelites, we're not your enemy. It has been proven, brothers and sisters, that the original people in the world were what you will call black of today. We are presenting as Israelites that we come from a specific group of the ancient black people known as the Israelites. We use archaeology, prophecy, and history for reasonable purposes. Even when they try to go genetically and use DNA and all of this kind of stuff like that, it kind of like backfired on them because the people who were known for such turned out to be a people, if we will, in Southern Africa called the Limba. So when they try to say, oh, we have the priest DNA, it turned out to be more so in people in Africa than European people. So, brothers and sisters, in this particular matter and in this particular realm, all right, so is what we want to emphasize in this case, if we will. All right. The historian Philo spoke of 1 million Hebrews from Cyrene to Ethiopia. There was a revolt from those in Cyrene, which was suppressed by Hadrian. Hadrian was a Spaniard, meaning of Spain, and so was Bartolome Casas, and they both oppressed the Israelites centuries apart. Who here has heard, brothers and sisters, of Bartolome Casas? Batu. Can anyone who is listening, and thank you for the time at this time, brothers and sisters. I know where I'm at over here in the East Coast. The Sabbath is beginning to end. So I thank the people who are still online and watching in support of the channel. I appreciate that. Right? Bartolome Casas was a Spaniard. And so, brothers and sisters, was Hadrian. Now, how are they connected? They both went against the house of Israel. Let's continue. The enslavement of our people. The Atlantic slave trade going north, then west will be addressed. This is not to deny that there was an Atlantic slave trade going east. The guy Goncalves, working for Henry the Navigator in 1441, had slaves sent to Portugal. The author Basil Davidson, in his book, A History of West Africa, speaks of the fact that slaves were brought to Europe. In her book, Susan Everett wrote in History of Slavery, we see that by 1492, there were 1,000 slaves brought to Europe. According to Franklin Moss in his book, From Slavery to Freedom, we see that slaves were in Cuba. According to Cowley in his book, Black Cargoes, we see that the first slaves in what is now the United States can be dated to 1526. Why then focus on the 1619 dates? The era is when a Dutch man of war sold to John Wolfe 20 Negroes. But did these Negroes come from Africa directly? The Dutch brought them to Virginia from Brazil. Some people in history state that they were captured from a Spanish slave ship. The Dutch West India Company, which was a slave trade company, since the time of 1623, were capturing slaves from Portuguese traders. The Dutch in 1613 had a slave base in Manhattan, which is in New York. The colonists had slaves. The first colony is Virginia in 1607. and the last being Georgia in 1732. The United States did not exist politically or as a name until 1776. George Washington, had slaves in 1743, and he later became president in 1789. This is the picture of the colonies of the United States. All right. So you had Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine. All this area here is the colonies. This area here is where colonial America had slaves. Because until 1776, that is how the said United States was like. So, brothers and sisters, that's something we want to point out for edification purposes. George Washington, brothers and sisters, had slaves since he was 11 years old in 1743. I want to emphasize that again. George Washington, who became the first president, had slaves since 1743. That's the same era and time that Thomas Jefferson was born. Thomas Jefferson had over 500 slaves. And, okay, I don't have one, but the backside of a nickel shows where Thomas Jefferson's slave house was in Monticello, which is in the state of what we call New York today. So these are things, brothers and sisters, that we want to talk about for edification purposes, if we will. All right. What happened to the tribes of Israel after they scattered into Western Africa? They was brought over here to the Western Hemisphere. What was done is like people like Washington had slaves from the West Indies in 1768. The West Indies got slaves from West Africa. We went over the aspect of the diaspora already. The United States tried to separate their guilt by enslaving blacks by saying it was the colonists. But the colonists say before them it was the Spaniards. Because see, Florida is a Spanish word. It comes from the Spanish word basically meaning flower. Florida got its name from Ponce de Leon, the same one who conquered the Taino people, brothers and sisters, in what we call Puerto Rico of today. So these are things, brothers and sisters, that we want to talk about for reasonable purposes. All right. And it goes on to say, the Asiento was a document that Charles V had that allowed the French and the English and the Spanish to trade in the West Indies having slaves. So, brothers and sisters, those are certain things that we want to talk about for reasonable purposes. All right. Charles V is the grandchild of Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain. Isabella and Ferdinand, brothers and sisters, were the couple of Spain that got rid of the Moors that were in Spain. So that's something, brothers and sisters, we want to emphasize for edification purposes, if we will. All right. Now, not saying plain salesman. In this book here, Israelite history, as it relates to the world. All right. This here is Charles V. This here is a copy and picture of the Asiento that we were talking about. All right. So this is detailed in the books that a brother wrote. Thank the Most High. All right. So let's go on, if we will, brothers and sisters, into this particular case. This was dated from the time of 1543 to 1834. Focusing on the natives in the West Indies, it is interesting that they too were enslaved. In 1619, the date is not when blacks were first brought to what we call today the United States. In the year 1568, there were blacks and Indians in what is called Connecticut who struck for freedom. Now, why do we point out the situation in 1658? Is because they want to say, oh, those are just indentured servants. They were not slaves. Then why will they feel the need to revolt? If they were just indentured servants, like, they weren't really slaves, then there will be, as people will try to portray it wasn't really as bad as that. Then why would they revolt against what was not really bad? Stop it. They were enslaved because they were being treated as slaves. Hands down. That's what that is. You understand? In that particular realm. So we can understand that for edification purposes. Okay. Let us go on, if we will, brothers and sisters. The year 1641 is when the governor of Maryland, named Leonard Calvert, had slaves. The guy, John Hawkins, taking it back, and we want to close out, in 1562, set the English slave trade and captured slaves that the Portuguese had, called the Lacandos. Brothers and sisters, John Hawkins was the worker of the Queen of England, Elizabeth I, who was the daughter of Mary in the aspect in the 16th century. To study about what happened and what occurred within the slave trade is something that we want to go in and talk about for reasonable purposes, if we will. Brothers and sisters, here it is. Creator willing, we want to have this book released. All right. From Assyria to America, Part 2. In the table of contents, we spoke about this on this channel the other day. The anticipated release date of this book, brothers and sisters, is this coming Monday, February 1st. Why did a brother pick that date? Is because that is when many of our people are interested in hearing about what happened in history. Now, sadly, our history in America is more about enslavement than freedom. Slavery being before the United States existed in the same lands, right? We're talking 1776 being when the United States became to be. But we're talking over 200 years before that in 1526 in North Carolina. We're talking since that era, brothers and sisters. Then we have this guy here, Bosman. He worked for the Dutch as far as trading in slaves. New Amsterdam became known today as New York. The Dutch got that from the Lenape Indians in trade, but they was wicked. The Dutch were wicked. So after and during the era of 1646, and then later on in 1664, when the British got a hold of New York, they continued in the slave trade. So you had the Dutch that was in New York. You had, brothers and sisters, the British enslavers that were in New York. And then later on, in the 1830s, you had the Portuguese that was trading black people off as slaves, just like the Greeks did it in the era of the Maccabees, just like the Hamites was doing it in the era of the time of Joel the prophet with the Grecians. The Spaniards, the Grecians, the Italians, the Europeans, not all of them, but the majority, in many cases, were involved in the slave trade since the days of the Greek Empire. Who was the people in the nation behind them, pushing them, were the Edomites. The Edomites who knew, who they were capturing when they went to Western and Central Africa. Christopher Columbus had a guy with him who was a Hebrew translator when they came over to the Western Hemisphere. When you hear about them saying Jerusalem is in the West, they were talking about Israelites that were scattered from the land of Israel and then migrated on their own over here to the West. It's not talking about the land of Jerusalem itself. It's talking about, as it does say in the Bible, speak to Jerusalem. Talking about the people of Jerusalem, not the land of Jerusalem. The Western Hemisphere is not where the Holy Land of Israel is. So these are just things we want to point out for edification purposes. I can be contacted at 908-587-4841. All right. The website, Danite. Sorry about that. DanitePublications.com, Amazon.com/author/ Yeshaya Yisrael. That's one of the sites to get the book. Amazon.com/author/Vitz history. You get the history books on that particular site. So for those who are interested, you can acquire the books or contact me for such. Thou shalt not steal. To date, nobody can say that they gave me the money and they didn't get the book. I don't get down like that. You understand? So just want to point that out for reasonable purposes, brothers and sisters. All right. Motzah Shabbat Shalom. Departure of the Sabbath. Shalom. Brothers and sisters, as the sun is going down, again, I thank you for the time and so forth. I'm going to, starting tonight, throughout the night, and tomorrow throughout the day, complete the work on the book From Assyria to America, Part 2, for it to be released for purchase for those who want it on Monday, this coming Monday, Yom Shani, or the second day of the week. All right. So a brother has to put some finishing workings on the book, some edit some pictures, and put some final touches on the book before one can say it's good enough to be released. All right. So again, I'm open to constructive criticism. If you click dislike, so be it. The only thing I ask is if you dislike, give a brother the respect in the comments to state why you dislike. You understand? State why you dislike. Tell me to work on this or that. Do this, do that. I get people who tell me the presentation could be better if you do this, that, or the third. Present it, brothers and sisters. Now, for those who've been following along, I don't currently use like a lot of PowerPoints because I want to show the picture directly and talk more so to the people directly, like visual, if we will. All right. So that's why that particular case, as far as the PowerPoint thing matter goes. In time, after the release of that book, I want to create a will and work on another project, if we will. Right. This right here, Hebrew is Easy, Volume 7. The easiness of the nif'al, the PL, and the hifil stems. Those are verb stems in Hebrew. All right. So, Creator willing, that book will be released in the month of March. Then we have Slavery 1619, the cherished date. The anticipated release date for this book is the end of February. So, From Assyria to America, Part 2, brothers and sisters, we anticipate to have released February, and also small picture, sorry, February 1st. We anticipate to have, brothers and sisters, this book released at the end of February. So we want to, as Israel, take respectful advantage of people speaking upon what is referred to as Black History Month, when our people's ears and their hearts, their minds, and their soul, their conscience is teach us. Let me know what it is. What's going on? And respectfully take advantage of such. Brothers and sisters, thank you for the time. Thank you for those who supported. Again, my number, 908-587-4841. Text or call. All right. Lastly, if we will, we want to show and respect the books for those who are interested. All right. Hebrew is Easy, Volume 1. From Aleph to Shamar. What this book gets into, brothers and sisters, looking at the table of contents, the alphabet and the vowels. if we will. All right. The alphabet and the vowels. Simple rules of Hebrew. Simple understanding of masculine nouns. Simple understanding of the qual stem. Conclusion, bibliography, and about the author. All right. In this book here, brothers and sisters, let me turn this back on a little. Sorry about that. I suggest, brothers and sisters, because you can pick your moray or your morah. You can pick your teacher. Get this book here. So you want to learn Hebrew by, I'll call her Iman out of respect, Shoshana Bat Levy. You can get this book by going to this email here. And you can look that up. That book is very intense as far as getting into the knowledge of Hebrew and so forth and so on. All right. This book here, Hebrew is Easy, Volume 2. Right. This, brothers and sisters, gets into saying the Hebrew letter hey, the standard with vowels, the pronouns I, you, he, she, and so forth, the feminine nouns in simple possession, sentences, command form, prefixes, suffixes, and grammar. All right. Biblical Hebrew discussed. Then we have the conclusion. Now, in this book here, when the part is called Biblical Hebrew discussed, is does Hebrew have vowels? What is Paleo Hebrew? What is ancient Hebrew? What exactly is modern Hebrew? I discussed that in that particular chapter in that book there. All right. So, somebody wrote, I have to buy that book. All right, thank you, Black Ave. Now the books that I'm showing on that I wrote is on actually on Amazon itself for those who are interested. All right. All right. So then we have here Hebrews Easy Volume 3. All right. In this particular table of contents, the easiness of the qual regular verb, the qual lamed hey verb, the qual lamed aleph verb, sorry, then lamed hey, the iron verb, the lamed het verb, the lamed ayin verb, the iron wow of the qual stem, the iron wow, the iron yod, the pay noon, the pay yod, the pay aleph. So you can sit there and see its particular table of contents. And this discussed the qual stem, brothers and sisters, in this particular realm. All right. We have here Hebrews Easy, Volume 4. All right. And in this right here, we have introduction, said the alphabet, the masculine singular nouns and possession, the masculine plural nouns in possession, the feminine singular nouns in possession, the feminine plural nouns in possession. Now, what do we mean by possession? Meaning, take the word like horse, Horse. The word horse in Hebrew is said as sus. So susi would be my horse. Now, susa, right, is a mare, which is a female horse. Mare is a female horse. So the way to say a masculine or a horse that's a male is sus. So susa will be a mare or a female horse. Susi, my horse. Susati, my mare. That's what that means as far as possession. Mine, yours, his, and hers. All right. So just want to show that for reasonable purposes. Then we have here Hebrew is Easy, Volume 5. Let us talk one to another. All right. Okay. And brothers and sisters, I want to take out the time, if we will. This brother here, Chief Naftali Bendan, he made this flyer and made some of my book covers. All right. You can reach out to him 718-744-7371. 718-744-7371. And he does as pointed out here, logos and identity, event flyers, consulting, advertising, resumes, banners. He does very, very good work. He's actually the brother that I just spoke, Naftali Dan, known him since I was 14 and I'm 40 now. He actually did this cover, not with it being written. That's mine doing by going into my own book. And he made this cover here. So his work, brothers and sisters, is very, very good. All right. So we just want to point that out. Now he also did this cover here, Hebrews Easy, Volume 6. All right. Now, this is a picture of me, and may she rest in peace, my mother, my very first Hebrew teacher. All right. Once it came down into that. All right. So we want to point out and do respect, brothers and sisters. May they rest in peace. True Maureen. I know people call me a Moray, but I come from a line of teachers. And may these pioneers rest in peace. This man here, may he rest in peace, is Maury Mishael. And this man, may he rest in peace, is Chief Naphtali Ben Naphtali. All right? This man, may he rest in peace, was a great Hebrew teacher. This man in my life, brothers and sisters, was a very great advisor. I spoke with them on Sabbath about Sabbath things, and I spoke with them as a young man to an older man about things that have nothing to do with the Shabbat. If you can understand where I'm going with that. Real life, outside of the Shabbat day. That's why I admire those men. May they rest in peace. Not to get too far. All right. So, brothers and sisters, once it comes down into that, not playing salesman, but just want to show this here. Somebody mentioned the New Testament and so forth. There's a book here, Old Testament Israelites Response to Messianic Israelites. All right. This book too is online for those who are interested. And brothers and sisters, the table of contents of this book, all right, goes as follows. Old Testament Israelites respond. The matter of sacrifices, Jeremiah 31, Isaiah 7, Deuteronomy 18, Old Testament-based brothers respond, or Old Testament-based Israelites respond. Said prophecies of Jesus explained, such as Isaiah 53, such as Zechariah chapter 3, and so forth. Jesus and Paul versus Moses and Solomon. Old Testament-based Israelites respond, part 2. So that is the table of contents in this book right here. All right. Now, when I spoke about this book, when brothers and sisters who are messianic come against us, Old Testament based, what I get is the only book we need is the Bible. But brothers and sisters, this is no disrespect intended. I definitely have to respect that. But throughout the Bible, as we just pointed out, Revelation 22 is referring you back to the Torah. First John chapter 5 refers you back to the Torah. So why stay in the other book when that book refers you to the old book? When putting a book together, like for this one right here, From Assyria to America, which is also available online, right? If I'm citing something, to give an example, like for instance, in this page right here, on page 224 in this book right here, right? From Assyria to America, like this being part 1. Part of it says, citing what I cited. As a result of the sugar factories, there are so many Negroes in the island of Hispaniola that it resembles Ethiopia itself. Ethiopia, we already went over that terminology. And that citation comes from Documents of West Indian History by Eric Williams. So, yeah, I wrote this book, told out to the Most High, thank the Most High for that, available for those online. But I'm citing another book in the book I wrote. So don't just stay in the book a brother wrote, go to where he cited to fact check his information out of respect. So in brothers and sisters, in this book, if you're telling me that the New Testament refers you to the Old Testament, and I, as an Old Testament based brother, can state that Malachi, David, and Joshua refer you to the laws of Moses, why just stay in the part that's referring you to something else? The laws of the Most High don't refer you to another book. And with that, shalom. Most High bless.